Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to thank the Prime Minister for an advanced copy of the statement. But what we have before us is a rehashed version of previously rejected proposals that put the Good Friday Agreement at risk, that would trigger a race to the bottom on rights and protections for workers, consumers and our precious environment. Given the seriousness of this issue and the vagueness of the proposals so far, can the Prime Minister tell this House if and when he plans to publish the full legal text that he must submit to the EU? These proposals would lead to an even worse deal than that agreed by the former Prime Minister. The Prime Minister signed up to the backstop in Cabinet and he voted for the withdrawal agreement as a backbencher. His letter to the President of the Commission yesterday claims both are now unacceptable. Perhaps he can tell us what has changed. Why did he support it then but oppose it now? The letter makes his intentions clear. It rejects any form of customs union, something demanded by every business and industry body in Britain and every trade union. They want to ditch EU standards on workers' rights, environmental regulations and consumer standards and engage in a race to the bottom. Deal or no deal, Mr. Speaker, this government's agenda is clear. They want a Trump deal Brexit. A Trump deal Brexit that would crash our economy and rip away the standards that put a floor under people's rights at work, that protect our environment and protect our consumers. No Labour MP could support such a reckless deal that would be used as a springboard to attack rights and standards in this country. The truth is that after 3 years, this government still hasn't found an answer to solving the issue of the Irish border and the Good Friday Agreement. Where once the government was committed to having no border in Ireland, they're now proposing 2 borders in Ireland, ripping up the UK-EU joint report from December 2017. So can the Prime Minister confirm the government has now abandoned their commitment to the people of Northern Ireland, that they would ensure there is no physical infrastructure or related checks and controls on the island of Ireland? I'm sorry, I'm only quoting what the government said. Mr. Speaker, while EU leaders have been lukewarm, the response from businesses in Northern Ireland has been very stark. Glyn Robert, the head of Retail Northern Ireland, said the proposal would lead to north-south tariffs with, I quote, huge negative impacts on farmers and the agri-food sector. He went on to say, and I quote, it would also mean 2 borders requiring renewal after 4 years, surveillance in border communities without their consent, and checks north-south and west-east. Tina McKenzie, the chair of the Federation of Small Businesses for Northern Ireland, was absolutely clear. She said, all the promises of unfettered access have been abandoned. Yes. Northern Ireland is a small business economy, and this is the death knell for some of those businesses. Mr. Speaker, these plans are simply unworkable. Mr. Speaker, for what we have before us is not a serious proposal to break the deadlock. Instead, these proposals are nothing more than a cynical attempt by the Prime Minister to shift the blame for his failure to deliver. We can only conclude his political advisor was telling the truth when he called the negotiations with the EU a sham. So can the Prime Minister give a clear answer to one question? If he doesn't get a deal at the October Council Summit, will he abide by the law of this country, the EU Withdrawal No. 2 Act, and request an extension to avoid a disastrous no deal? Mr. Speaker, the government's proposals are neither serious nor credible. Labour consulted with UK industry, businesses and unions on the need for a comprehensive customs union. close single market alignment and robust protection for workers' rights and environmental standards. We need an extension for serious negotiations towards the sort of deal that Labour has set out. And then let the people decide, leave with a sensible deal or remain. The current proposals would damage the whole UK economy and the Northern Irish economy especially, and would undermine the Good Friday Agreement. They would lead to a race to the bottom on workers' rights, environmental rights, and strip back even the limited protections his predecessor had agreed to. Instead of spending the last few months building consensus in Parliament and across the EU, the Prime Minister has put forward proposals he knows won't be acceptable either in Brussels or Westminster, and that would damage the UK's industry, people's jobs and living standards. Mr. Speaker, the only people who won't suffer are the Prime Minister's hedge fund donors who are currently betting against the pound and running down our fragile economy. He is doing nothing but seeking to divide and risking this country's future for his own political gain. An America First deal with President Trump. The proposals are unrealistic and damaging and will, as I think the Prime Minister full well knows, be rejected in Brussels, rejected in this House and rejected across this country.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I must confess I am disappointed by some of the tone that and the remarks that the honourable gentleman has made, because I think that this is a very good basis for a deal, and to take his points in turn and to take his questions seriously, Mr. Speaker. He asks what is the advantage of this deal over the previous withdrawal agreement, and very simply it is this, Mr. Speaker, that the objections on all sides of the House to the previous withdrawal agreement were based on the backstop, which, as the right honourable gentleman knows, keeps the UK locked in the customs union and in the single market with no say on those arrangements. And, Mr. Speaker, I listened very carefully to honourable members on all sides of the House during those debates, and that was the burden of the House's objections to the backstop. He asks a reasonable question about standards, Mr. Speaker, environmental and social protections, and I think it would be the will of this House under any circumstances to keep our standards the highest in the world. And the advantage that we have in coming out of the EU, as I'm sure the right honourable gentleman would accept if he reflected on it, is that we can go further. And there are some things that we can now do that have been long called for by the British people, for instance on animal welfare, that I think would be very advantageous. For instance, we can now ban the cruel export of live animals. And I'm sure that he will see that there are advantages that flow from this approach. He asked about physical infrastructure at the border, and I think I've been clear many times, and this government has been clear many times indeed. The previous administration, my right honourable friend, was absolutely clear that under no circumstances will the UK institute physical infrastructure at or near the border. He raised the concerns of businesses in Northern Ireland, and of course they must be at the forefront of our minds, and we will ensure that their needs are properly looked after, and that is indeed why we have made the compromises that we have for the immediate future to protect their immediate interests. And they will, of course, he asked about unfettered access to the GB market. They will, of course, have unfettered access to the GB market, and that goes with that, and with no checks whatever. And one thing is absolutely certain about those businesses is that they want a deal, Mr. Speaker. They want a deal. I've talked to them, I'm sure the right honourable gentleman has. And I may say to him, and I say to the House, I believe this is our chance. and their chance to get a deal. And I listened to what he had to say about delay and keeping this country in the EU beyond the 31st of October. And I must say, Mr. Speaker, that option does not commend itself to me. It would incur another £1 billion a month to no advantage whatever. I think the people of this country have had enough unnecessary dither and delay. They want to get Brexit done. They want to get on and do a deal. Mr. Speaker, this is a very good basis for the deal. I commend it to the House, and I hope that honourable and right honourable members across the House will support it.